In the last several years, every time SNK released a new fighting game, it's like you could feel a finger curl on the monkey's paw. The gameplay tends to be great, or at least good, but then something else always has to go wrong. Samurai Shodown was a fantastic comeback for an old classic, but it waited a year before releasing on PC and then spent another year in the Epic jail before it could release on Steam. Not to mention another 2-year wait for them to implement rollback netcode. King of Fighters 15? Same story. Pretty much everyone loved how it plays, but matchmaking was broken for over a year, and even when it worked, the game did not have the most consistent netcode. At first it seemed like City of the Wolves would face a similar issue, but during the second open beta they seemingly managed to fix it. People were getting matches one after another, and while netcode still didn't get the most universal approval, it at least seemed to be functional. Instead, the controversy came from the, let's say, interesting choice of guest characters. Namely, a real-life football player with multiple rape accusations across his career, and a DJ that made some funny music videos but seemingly nobody heard of before he was announced. These choices are so unbelievably bad that it became obvious that this is probably not the decision of SNK, but the decision of their owner Mohammed bin Salman, or someone related to him. It's no coincidence that Ronaldo is currently under contract with the Saudi football team and Salvatore Ganacci is signed to MDL Beast, an entertainment company and music label that's also owned by the Public Investment Fund. This might be a drop in the bucket compared to SNK themselves being owned by the murderous autocrat, but it's also the first concrete sign of his influence on the studio, which is something that SNK has denied in the past, and giving them credit was seemingly true in the past. The whole situation has already made some people cancel their pre-orders, and if knowing about this is something that makes you uncomfortable about supporting SNK, then you are completely justified. However, it's also understandable why some don't want to miss out on a potentially great fighting game because of a bloodthirsty dictator who probably doesn't even understand what fighting games are. So, without further ado, let's see if this much-awaited sequel to Garou: Mark of the Wolves actually lives up to the expectations. Let's start with something that SNK typically excels at, the gameplay. If you wanted a traditional fighting game that doesn't make too many concessions for the sake of attracting a wider audience, then that's what you're gonna get with Fatal Fury. While it makes a number of big changes compared to its predecessor, it's still fundamentally an SNK game. So what does that mean? More than almost any other developer, SNK tends to put a heavy emphasis on core systems and universal mechanics, and less emphasis on individual characters. They do still have their unique quirks and playstyles, but the games are usually more about trying to master the overall system rather than learning ins and outs of every character and every matchup. It might not appeal to people who like something like ArcSys or French-bred games where different characters can almost feel like playing a different game, but SNK more than makes up for it by giving you a very intricate and complex system where you have so many options to consider at any given moment. For City of the Wolves, they also introduced the new rev system. In many ways, it's very similar to Drive in SF6, especially with the way it connects with all the other mechanics. From Rev Meter, you have access to 4 different options. Rev Blow is your big, safe armored move. It's only available in SPG and has 2 versions, Grounded and Aerial. Rev Arts are simply your EX moves, but Rev Accel allows you to cancel EX special moves into each other. Finally, there's Rev Guard, which is similar to Faultless Defense in Guilty Gear. It's essentially a block button that will negate chip damage and push opponents further away at the expense of Rev Meter. It can also protect you from cross-ups, but it will not cover both high and low hits like the held parry in Street Fighter 6. Another similarity here is that using up Rev Meter will eventually cause you to overheat. In this state you cannot use any Rev mechanics, you cannot use parries, and you have to rely on a tiny, easy to deplete guard meter. If your opponent guard crushes you, it essentially guarantees that they can punish you with a high damage combo. While the rev system will draw a lot of obvious comparisons to Street Fighter's Drive, one key difference here is that the aforementioned rev mechanics are a lot less oppressive. They are very important, but there is nothing as game-defining as Drive Rush or Drive Impact. There is nothing really here to allow you to skip neutral or force the offense. In fact, the only mechanic that really affects the flow of the match is SPG, which Garou players will remember as the top system. You have to pick 1/3 of your health bar, and when your health reaches that point, you will get an attack boost, access to Rev Blow, and your strongest version of Super. It forces a more cautious playstyle while it's active, but at the same time, you're never out of options in this game, especially thanks to the universal dodge attacks that allow crushing aerial or grounded moves. Another important aspect of this is the presence of just defense and hyper defense. You do the former by tapping back or down back just before getting hit, while latter is done out of block by pressing forward with much stricter timing. A successful parry will cool down your rev meter, allow you to guard cancel into rev blow, supers or specials, and give you back just a bit of health. Not enough to fill you up, but in fighting games even 1 pixel can make all the difference. Feints and breaks make their return as well. Feints will allow you to imitate the startup of your special moves without actually doing them, while breaks make it possible to cancel some special moves early. This has a lot of applications across the board, from mixing up your pressure to baiting reversals and extending your combos. To sort of sum it all up without focusing too much on individual mechanics, City of the Wolves aims to be as wide as a puddle but deep as an ocean. It's a very loose, old-school approach to fighting games, where developers just give you a lot of tools and let players figure out how and when they want to use them. In a surprising move, they even threw in one dual lane stage as a throwback to classic Fatal Fury. The only modern thing here is perhaps the presence of a simplified control scheme, the Smart style as SNK calls it. It's not a terrible option at the beginner skill level, and it might allow your friends who don't really play fighting games to mash out some basic combos, but modern controls they are not. You get much less control over the game, and certain mechanics such as breaks and feints outright don't exist in Smart style. Now that we discussed the gameplay, let's talk about what Fatal Fury seeks to offer you in terms of content. Sadly, this is where most of the praise ends, because the rest of Fatal Fury is a pretty standard fighting game package. If you just want to play online, then you're golden. There's ranked and casual queues, and you have dedicated player rooms where you can also set up a training slot. The only hassle here is that if you don't have someone on your friends list, joining the room can be a bit of an issue with their lengthy room codes. And the lack of Wi-Fi indicator is highly disturbing. When we switch to the single player side of things, you also have the box standard arcade mode, time attack, survival, and versus. An interesting exception here is the clone mode. It's very similar to Tekken's Ghosts, and it's supposed to be an AI copy of the player that learns to fight from your matches. You can train your own clone, fight other players, and there's a separate option to fight clones based on the nameless developers. This might have some potential in the future, but during the review period, it didn't feel too different from fighting your average high-level CPU opponent. The real selling point was seemingly the new story mode called Episodes of Southtown. SNK described it as a solo RPG adventure, promising fights under unique conditions, leveling your character, and unlocking skills. It created an expectation of something akin to the World Tour mode in Street Fighter 6, but in reality it's little more than arcade mode with extra steps. The way it works is that you pick a character to play the mode and then access the map of Southtown. On each region of this map there will typically be 3 to 4 story encounters, one secret fight, and then lots of just mind-numbing fights against CPU opponents. These arcade-style fights comprise the majority of each region, and you barely get to experience any sort of interesting conditions. A few specific fights will give you max meter, another one will have you fight in burnout, but then for most of the matches there are no tangible effects. Even when you start seeing perks on enemy fighters, it's usually limited to boring stuff like slight damage reductions or buffs. Only secret fights stand out in this regard, and it's mostly in a negative way. Across one run you'll find 6 secret fights, and beating them is just pure RNG. There is 1 in 66 chance that your next attack will instantly kill the opponent, so it comes down to hitting them over and over and over and hoping that you get lucky. Maybe your first punch will take them down, or maybe you will run out of time despite hitting them over and over. The RPG element comes down to just dealing more damage and taking less damage as your levels go up. The only interesting part here is that you can pick different skills to apply to your character. A lot of them are also simple buffs, but a few select ones can actually have impact on your gameplay. For example, one of Dong's skills turns a normal just defend into a guard crush, which made figuring out CPU patterns a lot more rewarding. Speaking of CPU, don't expect to see much of a challenge in any single player modes. Out of total 5 levels of AI opponent difficulty, 4 of them don't put up much of a fight until level 5 turns them into perfect Terminators. Level 5 CPU has pretty good spacing, it will punish you both on block and on whiff, and it will anti-air with impossible consistency. However, it's this consistency that makes it so easy to abuse. Jump in, parry their anti-air, punish. Even the infamous SNK bosses can't do anything about this. What doesn't help is that you will not face any really unique enemies. Aside from the game's roster, there are about 5 generic goons that will use abilities of other SNK fighters. Fighting them gets old after the first region, and you got 2 more as well as the new Game Plus version of the mode, which simply gives you more fights and higher level opponents. Outside of these battles, they offer exactly one unique minigame, and it's pretty funny because it's straight up a combination of bottle smashing and pizza making minigames from SF6. Except while SF6 used those to teach players how to do charge moves and perform fast, clean inputs, Fatal Fury just has you doing random QTE that has nothing to do with the game. That's true for the entire mode in general. It feels like it's aimed at a casual audience, but it doesn't actually teach them anything. It absolutely could by simply adding more unique conditions that force players to engage with specific mechanics and gameplay elements. But it simply doesn't. It's quite bizarre in general because with City of the Wolves, SNK is making this gigantic marketing push to get the game out there, but there's just nothing in this game to ease in new players. The only redeeming factor here is the sheer amount of fan service. Most places on the map are tied to Southtown locations we've seen in the past, and for those you can look at some of their older pixel art, read the descriptions, and read character comments about these places. As you clear out the mode with different characters, you will also unlock some bonus art, older game intros, and character conversations. The actual stories are also not that bad. They are often cheesy and predictable, but also quite sentimental. If you care about these characters, it can be quite satisfying to finally see them find what they were looking for, achieve their goals, or resolve their past issues. Funnily enough, the meat of that is actually in the arcade mode. It's all low budget, but you still get lengthy cutscenes with proper voice acting. Meanwhile, the story mode just offers a few panels and a bit of text to read at the end. SNK did say that they want this to be an ultimate Fatal Fury game, so in terms of both storytelling and gameplay this does ring true. The launch roster already has a great bit of variety and almost every character from the original game. Grappler fans might be disappointed that there's only one real grappler in the game right now, but everyone else should be able to find a character that fits their tastes. In one of the interviews, SNK has also mentioned that we can expect almost all the fan-favorite Fatal Fury characters to make a return, which helps to make the 2 awful guest characters hurt a bit less. Now, on the technical side, let's also mention a few other nice things. As far as PC ports go, Fatal Fury actually seems to be incredibly competent outside of lacking mouse support. The game runs great and I haven't experienced any compilation stutters or freezes. Perhaps the benefit of this game using Unreal Engine 4 rather than UE5. There's also plenty of options to customize things, and it's nice to see a game that doesn't force you to use some form of upscaling. Even when it comes to audio, you get a surprisingly granular control over what you do or don't want to hear. However, there's not much going on in terms of accessibility. You only really get this stage contrast setting that they've had in some previous games. In other ways, SNK went above and beyond with the color edit and jukebox. While some fighting games are selling you colors, Fatal Fury allows you to change everything on your own, and even replace some textures with different patterns, some of which you also unlock through the EOST mode. One weird thing though is that unlike in the trailers, there is no skin color edit option, at least not yet. There are of course some obvious concerns with what players might do if given complete control over that. Though thinking ahead, SNK also added an option for you to toggle custom palettes off entirely, or only within certain modes. Jukebox is also incredibly solid. They have included over a dozen albums that cover pretty much every single Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting soundtrack, with additional album of miscellaneous SNK music and the MDL Beast collaboration album. The best part here is that instead of only changing individual songs, you can build up small playlists for each stage or menu, which will then play in random or your custom order. So with all that said, is Fatal Fury worth it? If you don't have any moral qualms about it and you've been pining for an old school fighting game, then yes, absolutely. While a single player component is disappointing, the core gameplay is exceptionally solid, and it's refreshing to see a fighting game that doesn't have a premium currency, cash shop, or a battle pass, while still promising 3 years of support at the very least. Let's be honest, fighting game reviews tend to suffer from some rose-tinted glasses. It's the honeymoon period, everyone is excited and nobody knows all the intricacies yet. That's why impressions tend to be less positive a year or half a year later when people find all the grime. But honestly, it feels like that's not going to be an issue for this game. The universal mechanics are so versatile and powerful that much like with Third Strike and the original Garou, they will likely serve as a safeguard that keeps things from being too strong or too weak. It also enables an impossibly high skill ceiling with lots of room for skill expression. So it's hard not to get excited about the competitive future of this game.